The recording light blinked red in the small interview room aboard Harmony Point Station. Commander Zethkalar's forearms trembled as he settled into the specially designed chair. His gray skin looked pale under the artificial lights, and his large black eyes kept darting toward the door as if he might bolt at any moment. Across the metal table sat Nimthera, a respected war correspondent from the Galactic News Network. Her species had remained neutral during the Human Coalition War, making her the perfect choice to document these interviews. She had spent months convincing Coalition veterans to share their stories for the historical record. "Are you ready to begin, Commander?" Nimthara asked softly. Her voice was gentle, but Zethkalar still flinched at the sound. "I am not sure anyone can be ready to relive those memories," he replied. His translator box made his words sound mechanical, but the pain in his voice came through clearly. 17 years have passed since the war ended, yet I still wake up, screaming some nights. Nimthara nodded with understanding. She had interviewed many war veterans over the years, but none seemed as deeply affected as those who had fought against the humans. Something about that conflict had broken parts of the Coalition military that might never heal. "Let's start at the beginning," she said. "Tell me about first contact with humanity." Zethkalar's eyes closed for a long moment. When he opened them again, they seemed to be looking at something far away and long ago. "We were so confident," he began. The Rex Coalition had been expanding across the galaxy for over 300 years. We had absorbed 47 different species into our empire. Some joined willingly after seeing our power. Others fought briefly before surrendering. All of them followed the same pattern. He paused to take a drink from a specially designed cup that accommodated his alien mouth structure. His hands were steadier now that he had begun talking. When our scout ships first detected human radio signals in 2387, the High Command was excited. Here was another primitive species confined to a single star system. Their technology was crude compared to ours. Their ships were slow and clumsy. By our calculations, they had barely mastered spaceflight. Nimthera made notes on her electronic tablet. What was the Coalition's initial plan for humanity? "The same plan we used for all new species," Zethkalar replied. "Peaceful contact first, followed by an offer to join the Coalition. If they refused, we would demonstrate our superior military power by taking control of a few of their outer colonies. Usually this convinced new species to accept our protection and guidance. But something was different about the humans? Not at first," Zethkalar said, shaking his head. "The initial contact went exactly as expected. Our diplomatic ship, the Dawn of Unity, arrived at the edge of their solar system and transmitted our standard greeting. The humans responded politely and invited us to establish formal contact at a space station they called Gateway." The old soldier's expression grew thoughtful. "I was there as part of the security detail for Admiral Crintal. The humans who met us seemed very ordinary. They were smaller than most Coalition species, had no natural weapons or armor, and appeared physically weak. Their technology was functional but simple. Everything about them suggested another easy addition to the Coalition." "When did things start to change?" "During the formal negotiations," Zethkalar replied. "Admiral Crintal presented our standard offer. Humanity would become a protected member of the Coalition. In exchange, they would provide resources and accept Coalition oversight of their government and military. 3 of their outer colonies would be placed under direct Coalition control as payment for our protection services." "How did the humans respond?" "That was the first sign something was different," Zethkalar said, and for the first time a hint of respect entered his voice. "The human diplomat, a woman named Helen Carter, listened to our entire proposal without interruption. Most species either accepted immediately or began arguing right away. She just sat there taking notes." "What did she say?" "She asked for time to consult with her government." This was normal, so Admiral Crintal agreed to wait 3 days for their answer. But there was something about the way she looked at us during those negotiations. Like she was studying us, learning how we thought and acted. Zethkalar's upper right arm began to twitch, a nervous habit he had developed since the war. 3 days later, Helen Carter returned with their response. She was accompanied by a human military officer, Captain Jake Morrison. I remember him clearly because he never spoke during the meeting, but his eyes never stopped moving. He was watching everything, memorizing every detail about our ships, our weapons, our procedures. And their answer? Helen Carter stood up and delivered it with perfect politeness. She thanked the coalition for the generous offer, but humanity respectfully declined. They preferred to remain independent and develop at their own pace. She suggested that both species could benefit from peaceful trade and cultural exchange instead. Nimthara looked up from her notes. That must have surprised Admiral Crintal. Surprised is not the right word, Zethkalar said grimly. He was insulted. No species had ever turned down coalition membership before. He gave the humans the standard warning that independence was dangerous in a galaxy full of hostile forces. The coalition's protection was not optional for species in our expansion zone. How did the humans react to that threat? Helen Carter remained calm and polite, but something changed in Captain Morrison's posture. It was subtle, but every coalition soldier in that room noticed it. He didn't make any threatening moves, but suddenly the air felt different. Dangerous. Zethkalar took another drink before continuing. Helen Carter repeated that humanity appreciated the coalition's concern, but they would handle their own defense. She suggested that perhaps the coalition might find better opportunities in other parts of the galaxy, where their services would be more welcome. That must have made Admiral Crintal angry. Furious, Zethkalar confirmed. He stood up and declared that humanity had 72 hours to reconsider their position. If they continued to refuse coalition protection, the coalition would be forced to demonstrate why such protection was necessary. It was the same ultimatum we had used dozens of times before. And then, Captain Morrison finally spoke. Zethkalar said, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. His words were simple and polite, but they sent chills through every coalition soldier present. He said, "Admiral, with respect, we decline your offer. Please leave our space." That doesn't sound particularly threatening. It wasn't the words, Zethkalar explained. It was the way he said them, like he was making a promise rather than a request. Like he already knew exactly what would happen next, and was comfortable with it. Most species threatened or begged. At this point, Captain Morrison sounded like he was discussing the weather. Nimthara leaned forward. What happened when the ultimatum expired? Admiral Crintal ordered the fleet to begin standard intimidation maneuvers. We moved our ships into human space and took positions around their 3 outer colonies. The plan was to demonstrate our firepower by destroying some empty ships or uninhabited asteroids. Usually, this convinced stubborn species to cooperate. But the humans didn't cooperate. They did something no other species had ever done, Zethkalar said, and his voice began to shake again. They started preparing for war. Not panic preparations or desperate defenses. Methodical, organized, efficient preparations like they had been planning for this possibility all along. What kind of preparations? They began moving civilian ships away from potential combat zones, but not in the chaotic evacuation we expected. It was coordinated, systematic. They repositioned their defensive platforms and started broadcasting coded messages between their colonies. Our intelligence officers couldn't break the codes, which was unusual. Most species used simple encryption that our computers cracked easily. Zethkalar's forearms were all trembling now, but the most disturbing thing was their attitude. Our psychological warfare specialists had analyzed human communications and expected fear, anger, or desperation. Instead, the humans seemed focused and determined, like they viewed our arrival not as a disaster, but as a problem they needed to solve. When did the actual fighting begin? The next morning, Admiral Crintal ordered the destruction of an unmanned human mining platform near Kepler Station. It should have been a simple demonstration of power. Instead, it became the first battle of a war that would haunt the coalition for generations. Zethkalar looked directly at Nimthara for the first time since the interview began. I need you to understand something before I continue. The coalition had fought wars for 3 centuries. We knew how battles worked, how species reacted under pressure, how conflicts developed and ended. Everything we knew about warfare was about to become useless. Because of the humans? Because humans don't think about war the way other species do, Zethkalar replied. We were about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. The recording light continued to blink red as the old soldier gathered his strength to continue his story. Outside the interview room, Harmony Point Station continued its peaceful rotation, but inside, the shadows of an old war were beginning to stir once again. Zethkalar's breathing became shallow as he prepared to describe the Battle of Kepler Station. His four hands gripped the edge of the table, and Nimthara noticed his skin had turned an even paler shade of gray. The morning of the attack, I was aboard the assault cruiser Righteous Hammer, he began. Admiral Krintal had assigned my ship to lead the demonstration strike against the human mining outpost. It should have been routine. We had done similar operations hundreds of times before. What made this different? Nimthara asked gently. Everything, Zethkalar replied. From the moment we entered the Kepler system, nothing went according to plan. Our intelligence report said the outpost was defended by 2 small patrol corvettes and some converted civilian ships. Easy targets for a ship like mine. He paused to collect his thoughts. Coalition military doctrine was built on 3 centuries of success. We used overwhelming force, advanced technology, and formal battle procedures. Every engagement followed the same pattern. First, we would announce our presence and give the enemy a chance to surrender. Then we would demonstrate our superior firepower by destroying a few military targets. Finally, the enemy would either surrender or be quickly defeated. But the humans didn't follow this pattern. They ignored it completely, Zethkalar said, and there was still disbelief in his voice after all these years. When we arrived at Kepler Station, the human commander, Captain Lisa Hayes, responded to our surrender demand with a simple message. She said her ships would defend the station and suggested we reconsider our attack. That sounds like a normal military response. The words were normal, but everything else was wrong, Zethkalar explained. Most species either surrendered immediately when faced with superior force, or they made desperate threats about fighting to the death. Captain Hayes sounded like she was discussing routine patrol duties. No fear, no anger, no desperation. Just professional acknowledgement of the situation. Nimthara made more notes. What happened when the battle began? Admiral Krintal ordered me to destroy one of the human corvettes as a demonstration. I targeted the nearest ship and prepared to fire. That's when I got my first real look at how humans fight. Zethkalar's upper left arm began to twitch. The human corvette I targeted didn't try to run or hide behind the station. Instead, it accelerated directly toward my ship. For a moment, I thought the human commander had panicked and was attempting a desperate ramming attack. Was that what happened? No. The corvette passed within weapons range of my ship without firing a shot. I was confused, so I held my fire and watched to see what the humans were doing. That's when I realized the corvette wasn't retreating or attacking. It was gathering information. Information about what? About us, Zethkalar said grimly. The human ship had sensors scanning our weapons, our armor, our engine signatures. They were learning everything they could about coalition technology in real time. By the time I understood what was happening, it was too late. Too late for what? The other human corvette had moved into position behind my ship while I was watching, the first one. But instead of attacking with standard weapons, they did something I had never seen before. They fired mining charges. Nimthara looked confused. Mining charges? Like the explosives used to break up asteroids? Exactly. But these had been modified somehow. Instead of simple explosives, they had been turned into guided missiles. The charges stuck to my ship's hull and detonated in sequence, targeting specific systems. My weapons, my engines, my communications. Each explosion was precisely placed to cause maximum damage with minimum explosive power. How could mining explosives be so accurate? That was the first lesson about human warfare, Zethkalar replied. They don't just use military equipment to fight, they use everything. Mining charges, construction tools, civilian transport ships, communication satellites. Anything that can be turned into a weapon becomes a weapon. What happened to your ship? I lost main power and weapons control within the first few minutes. My ship was still intact, but it was helpless. That should have been the end of the engagement. In normal coalition warfare, a disabled ship would surrender or be destroyed quickly. But the humans didn't destroy you? They ignored me completely, Zethkalar said, and his voice carried a note of confusion even after 17 years. Once my ship was disabled, they treated it like it no longer existed. They moved on to the next target immediately. It was like they had solved the problem of my ship and dismissed it from their minds. That seems almost merciful. It wasn't mercy, Zethkalar corrected. It was efficiency. They had neutralized the threat I represented with minimal resources, so they moved those resources to the next problem. Everything they did was focused on solving the immediate tactical situation. Nimthara leaned forward with interest. How did the battle continue? The other coalition ships tried to adapt to the human tactics, but we were fighting an enemy that kept changing. Every time we thought we understood their strategy, they would do something completely different. Can you give me an example? The mining station itself became a weapon, Zethkalar said. The humans had civilian transport ships docked at the station when we arrived. We assumed these were evacuating non-combatants. Instead, they were being loaded with mining equipment and converted into attack ships. Civilian ships attacking military cruisers? Not attacking in the traditional sense. They were being used as decoys, sensor platforms, and mobile weapons carriers. One transport ship would approach our formation broadcasting fake distress signals, while another ship moved into attack position from a different angle. By the time we realized which ships were real threats, they had already struck. Zethkalar took another drink from his cup. His hands were steadier now, but his voice remained strained. The worst part was how they coordinated their attacks. Every human ship seemed to know exactly what every other human ship was doing. They moved like parts of a single organism rather than individual vessels. How was that possible? We never figured it out during the battle. Later analysis suggested they were using some kind of advanced communication system, but at the time it seemed like magic. Our ships would target one human vessel, only to discover that 3 other ships had already moved to protect it. What was the turning point of the battle? Lieutenant Commander Ryan Blake, Zethkalar said, and for the first time, his voice carried a note of respect. His corvette had taken heavy damage early in the fight. By all military logic, he should have withdrawn or surrendered. Instead, he did something that still gives me nightmares. What did he do? He used his damaged ship as a precision weapon. Blake calculated the exact trajectory needed to disable 3 of our cruisers with a single maneuver. His corvette had lost most of its armor and half its weapons, but he flew it directly through our formation like a guided missile. A suicide attack? That's what we thought at first. But Blake wasn't trying to destroy our ships by crashing into them. He was using his corvette's remaining weapons and the ship itself to create a chain reaction. His damaged engines leaked plasma that interfered with our sensors. His weapons fired at precise moments to disable specific systems on multiple ships, and his flight path forced our ships to maneuver in ways that put them in each other's firing lines. Nimthara stopped taking notes and stared at Zethkalar. 1 damaged ship disabled 3 cruisers? In less than 90 seconds, Zethkalar confirmed. Blake's corvette was destroyed in the maneuver, but he had accomplished something that should have been impossible. More importantly, he had shown every human in the system exactly how coalition ships were vulnerable. What happened to Lieutenant Commander Blake? His ship's escape pods were recovered by other human vessels. Blake survived with minor injuries and was back in command of another ship within a week. But the psychological impact on coalition forces was devastating. Why was it so devastating? Because Blake had treated the destruction of his own ship as an acceptable cost for a tactical advantage. This was completely outside our understanding of warfare. Coalition doctrine emphasized preserving valuable ships and experienced crews. The idea of deliberately sacrificing a vessel for strategic gain was horrifying to us. How did the battle end? Admiral Crintal ordered a full retreat after losing 6 ships and having 12 more disabled. The human forces had started with 2 corvettes and some civilian vessels. By the end of the engagement, they had somehow turned the entire system into a weapon. Zethkalar's voice grew quiet. As we withdrew, Captain Hayes transmitted a final message. She thanked us for the tactical exercise and suggested that the coalition might want to reconsider their expansion plans. She was polite and professional, like she had just finished a training simulation instead of a real battle. How did coalition leadership react to the defeat? They didn't believe the reports at first. A major coalition fleet defeated by a mining station and 2 patrol ships? It seemed impossible. Admiral Krintal was recalled for questioning, and new commanders were sent to deal with the human problem. But the humans had proven their tactics worked? They had proven something much more dangerous, Zethkalar replied. They had shown that they could turn any situation into a tactical advantage. Mining equipment became weapons. Civilian ships became military assets. Zethkalar's hands shook as he reached for his drink. The memories of Kepler Station had been difficult, but Nimthara could see that what came next would be even worse for the old soldier to discuss. After Kepler Station, Coalition High Command decided that the human problem required a different approach, he began. They sent Admiral Vexthon with a full siege fleet to take control of New Terra, humanity's primary agricultural colony. The plan was to capture the planet quickly and use it as leverage to force human surrender. How many ships did Admiral Vexthon have? Nimthara asked. 87 warships, including 12 heavy cruisers and 4 battleships. The largest fleet the coalition had ever assembled for a single operation. Intelligence reports said New Terra was defended by only a few patrol ships and had no significant military installations. It should have been an easy victory. That's what we thought, Zethkalar replied bitterly. I was assigned as ground operations coordinator, responsible for planning the occupation once the orbital defenses were eliminated. We expected the space battle to last maybe 6 hours. The ground occupation should have taken no more than 2 days. What went wrong? Everything. From the moment we arrived in the New Terra system, the humans started doing things that made no sense according to our understanding of warfare. Zethkalar closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The human commander was a woman named Amy Foster. She had been a military engineer before becoming a civilian colonist. Her second in command was Ben Clark, who had spent his whole life farming on New Terra. Neither of them had any experience commanding large military operations. But they were able to resist your fleet? They turned the entire planet into a weapon, Zethkalar said, and his voice dropped to a whisper. When our ships took orbit around New Terra, we expected to see desperate preparations for defense. Instead, we saw something that still haunts my dreams. What did you see? The humans were working. Not panicking, not running, just working. They moved with purpose and coordination, like they had been preparing for this moment for years. Every piece of farming equipment on the planet was being modified. Every building was being reinforced. Every road was being turned into a trap. Nimthara leaned forward. How could farmers resist a military invasion? That was our mistake, Zethkalar replied. We thought of them as farmers. They thought of themselves as humans who happened to be farming. The difference was everything. I don't understand. Amy Foster had designed the irrigation systems for half the planet. She knew every tunnel, every pipe, every underground channel. Ben Clark had been coordinating supply deliveries between settlements for 20 years. He knew every road, every bridge, every warehouse. Together, they knew New Terra better than we could ever learn it. Zethkalar's upper right arm began to twitch again. When we began orbital bombardment of military targets, the humans just moved their defenses. When we destroyed their communication towers, they used the irrigation tunnels to run new cables. When we cut their power lines, they rerouted electricity through farming equipment. How long did the orbital bombardment last? 3 weeks. We destroyed every obvious military target, every government building, every major road junction. The planet's surface looked like a war zone, but the humans kept fighting. They had moved their entire defense network underground and were using it more effectively than their original installations. When did you begin ground operations? Admiral Vexthon finally ordered ground assault after the orbital bombardment failed to break human resistance. I commanded the first wave of troops landing near the planet's capital city. We expected scattered resistance from demoralized survivors. Zethkalar's breathing became irregular. Instead, we landed in the middle of a carefully planned ambush. The humans had been watching our bombardment patterns and had predicted exactly where we would land. They were waiting for us. What kind of resistance did you encounter? Unlike anything in coalition military history, the humans had turned farming equipment into weapons of war. Tractors became armored vehicles. Crop harvesters became mobile fortresses. Irrigation pumps became pressure weapons that could cut through coalition armor. Surely your advanced technology gave you an advantage. Our technology was designed to fight other advanced militaries. The humans were using equipment we didn't even recognize as weapons. Our tactical computers couldn't analyze threats they had never seen before. Zethkalar took another shaky drink. But the worst part wasn't their improvised weapons. It was how they used them. Every human seemed to understand exactly what every other human was doing. They coordinated attacks across the entire planet without any central command structure we could identify. How was that possible? We never figured it out. They used their farming communication networks, their irrigation control systems, even their weather monitoring equipment to coordinate military operations. Systems that were never designed for warfare became more effective than our dedicated military communications. What was the most disturbing thing you witnessed? The humans' ability to adapt during combat. Zethkalar replied without hesitation. Every time we developed a tactic that worked against them, they would study it, understand it, and develop a counter-tactic within days, sometimes within hours. Can you give me a specific example? In the second month of the siege, we finally figured out how to jam their communication systems. For exactly 18 hours, we had a significant advantage. Human coordination broke down and we started making real progress capturing territory. But they adapted? They did something that violated every principle of military science. Instead of trying to restore their old communication systems, they created entirely new ones using equipment we didn't even know existed on the planet. Zethkalar's voice grew haunted. They started using the root systems of their crops to carry signals. Plants that had been growing for years suddenly became communication networks. We had no idea how to jam a forest. That sounds impossible. So did everything else they did. But impossible or not, it worked. Within a day, human coordination was better than it had been before we jammed their systems. What was your personal experience during the ground fighting? I spent 6 months on New Terra, and every day was a lesson in human warfare. They didn't just fight battles. They studied us while they fought, learning our tactics, our weaknesses, our psychology. What do you mean by studying your psychology? The humans discovered that Vrex soldiers become disoriented in complete darkness. Our species evolved on a planet with multiple suns, so we never experienced true darkness. Within a week of learning this, the humans had engineered planet-wide blackouts during every major assault. They attacked your psychological weaknesses? They attacked everything, our technology, our tactics, our biology, our psychology. But they didn't do it with cruelty or hatred. They did it with the same methodical approach they used for everything else. Nymthara looked up from her notes. What was the most frightening human you encountered? Marine Sergeant Kate Phillips. Zethkalar replied immediately. She commanded a unit that defended the agricultural research station where I was wounded. Kate Phillips was the first human I met who seemed to understand warfare the way humans understood farming. What do you mean? Farming is about solving problems. Soil problems, weather problems, pest problems, crop yield problems. Farmers study each problem, experiment with solutions, and adapt their methods based on results. Kate Phillips approached combat exactly the same way. How did this affect your troops? She treated coalition forces like a farming problem to be solved. She studied our movement patterns, our equipment capabilities, our command structure. Then she developed tactics specifically designed to counter each of our advantages. That sounds like normal military planning. Normal military planning takes weeks or months. Kate Phillips developed new tactics during combat. She would observe our responses to her attacks, analyze what worked and what didn't, and modify her approach in real time. Zethkalar's forearms were all trembling now. I watched her unit defeat a coalition force 3 times their size using nothing but farm tools and tactics she had invented that morning. She turned a grain silo into a command center, used fertilizer spreaders as artillery, and coordinated her attacks using signals sent through the planet's agricultural data network. What happened to your unit? Kate Phillips captured us without firing a shot. She analyzed our patrol patterns, predicted our route, and set up a trap using modified farming equipment that disabled our vehicles and weapons simultaneously. We never saw her soldiers until we were already prisoners. How did she treat coalition prisoners? With the same methodical approach she used for everything else. She studied us to understand how coalition military psychology worked, then used that knowledge to make us more effective prisoners. What does that mean? She gave us tasks that kept us busy and productive while preventing us from planning escapes or gathering intelligence. She fed us food that kept us healthy but affected our ability to coordinate resistance. She even used our own psychological needs against us, providing just enough comfort to make us reluctant to risk escape attempts. That sounds very calculated. Everything the humans did was calculated. They didn't fight with emotion or desperation. Zethkalar's composure finally cracked completely as he prepared to describe the Battle of Titan's Gate. His forearms wrapped around himself, and his gray skin had turned almost white. Nimthara noticed that he was rocking slightly in his chair. "Need a moment?" he whispered, and for several minutes the only sound in the room was his ragged breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. The Battle of Titan's Gate was supposed to end the war. Coalition High Command had assembled the largest fleet in our history, 237 ships including 15 battleships and the flagship Eternal Glory. I commanded the battleship alongside Admiral Krintal, who had been given one final chance to defeat humanity. This was the attack on Earth itself? The final strike against the human home system. Intelligence suggested that humanity had concentrated most of their remaining forces to defend Earth. High Command believed that one decisive victory would force human surrender and end the war. Zethkalar's hands shook as he continued. We had spent 2 years studying human tactics. Our best strategists had developed new doctrines specifically designed to counter human adaptability. We thought we were prepared for anything they could do. What was different about this battle plan? Everything was designed to prevent human improvisation. We would attack from multiple directions simultaneously, giving them no time to coordinate responses. We would target their command structures first, eliminating their ability to adapt during combat. We would use overwhelming force to end the battle before they could develop countermeasures. It sounds like a solid plan. It was a perfect plan for fighting any other species in the galaxy, Zethkalar replied bitterly, but we were fighting humans. What happened when your fleet arrived at Earth? Admiral Chris Patterson was waiting for us. He commanded the human defense with only 43 ships, less than 1/5 our numbers. According to every military calculation, the battle should have lasted 6 hours at most. But it didn't. It lasted 3 days. 3 days that destroyed everything I thought I knew about warfare. Zethkalar took a shaky breath. Patterson had done something that violated every principle of military command. Instead of keeping his fleet together for coordinated defense, he had divided it into independent units. Each group operated under completely different tactical doctrines. That sounds like poor military planning. That's what we thought. Admiral Krintal was delighted. Divided forces should have been easy to defeat in detail. We moved to engage the first group of human ships, confident that we could destroy them quickly and move on to the next. What went wrong? The first group fought like traditional human forces. Fast, adaptive, innovative. We had prepared for this, and our new tactics worked. We destroyed 5 human ships while losing only 2 of our own. Admiral Krintal declared that human adaptability had finally been countered. But there were other groups? The second group fought completely differently. They used tactics we had never seen before, not just from humans, but from any species. They seemed to ignore their own losses entirely, focusing only on damaging our ships in specific ways. Zethkalar's voice grew hollow. We realized they weren't trying to win the engagement. They were gathering data about our new anti-human tactics. Every ship they lost transmitted detailed information about our capabilities to the remaining human forces. They were sacrificing ships for intelligence. They were conducting experiments while fighting a battle for their home world. Each group of human ships was testing different approaches to defeating our new tactics. Some used traditional human methods. Others tried completely new strategies. Still others seemed to be deliberately provoking specific responses from our fleet. How did your forces react to this? Confusion at first, then growing fear. Our tactical computers couldn't analyze what the humans were doing because they were doing several different things simultaneously. Every time we adapted to counter one human strategy, another group would attack using completely different methods. What was Admiral Crintal's response? He ordered the fleet to ignore the smaller human groups and concentrate on destroying their command ship. If we could eliminate Patterson, human coordination would collapse and the battle would end quickly. Did this strategy work? We found Patterson's command ship and focused our entire fleet on destroying it. 15 battleships and over 50 cruisers concentrated their fire on a single human vessel. It should have been obliterated instantly. Zethkalar's rocking increased. Instead, we discovered that Patterson had somehow distributed his command functions across multiple ships. Destroying his flagship didn't eliminate human coordination. It just moved the command structure to backup vessels that continued operating exactly as before. How was that possible? We never understood it during the battle. Every human ship seemed capable of taking over command functions from any other human ship. Their entire fleet was like a single organism that could lose any part and continue functioning. What was the turning point of the battle? When we realized that the humans had stopped trying to win and started trying to teach us a lesson, Zethkalar whispered. What kind of lesson? Captain Maria Santos commanded a human destroyer that had lost all primary systems early in the battle. Her ship had no weapons, no shields, minimal life support. By every standard of warfare, she should have withdrawn or surrendered. But she didn't. She stayed in the battle and somehow turned her crippled ship into the most dangerous vessel in the human fleet. Santos used manual thruster control to position her destroyer for precision strikes against coalition weak points. How could a damaged ship be so dangerous? Because Maria Santos understood something about warfare that we didn't. A ship isn't just weapons and armor, it's mass, momentum, and position. She used her destroyer like a guided projectile, striking our ships at precisely calculated angles to cause maximum damage. Zethkalar's voice broke completely. I watched her position her dying ship for a killing shot against Admiral Crintal's flagship. Her crew stayed at their posts even though they knew the maneuver would destroy their ship. They were singing. Singing? Human battle songs. They were about to die, and they were singing like they were celebrating. Maria Santos transmitted a message before impact, thanking Admiral Crintal for the tactical challenge and hoping the lesson would be useful for future engagements. She destroyed the flagship. She crippled it so severely that Admiral Crintal had to transfer his command to another ship. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that 20 other human ships immediately moved to support Santos's attack, each one building on what she had accomplished. What do you mean? They had planned for her sacrifice. Maria Santos hadn't acted alone. Her destruction of the flagship was part of a larger strategy that involved coordination between dozens of human vessels. They had calculated that trading her ship for damage to our command structure was an acceptable exchange. The humans were willing to sacrifice themselves for strategic advantage. They were willing to sacrifice anything for victory, ships, equipment, their own lives. But they didn't do it with desperation or fanaticism. They did it with the same methodical calculation they used for everything else. Zethkalar stared at the wall for a long moment. That's when I understood what we were really fighting. Not just humans, but a species that viewed their own deaths as acceptable tactical options. How did the battle end? On the third day, Admiral Crintal realized that we were losing ships faster than we could destroy human vessels. Worse, every engagement was teaching the humans more about our capabilities while revealing nothing about theirs. The coalition retreated. We fled, Zethkalar corrected. The most powerful fleet in coalition history fled from 43 human ships. But by the time we retreated, There were only 19 human ships still operational. The humans had lost more than half their fleet, and they acted like they had won a great victory. Patterson transmitted congratulations to our surviving ships, thanking us for what he called an excellent training exercise. He suggested that future engagements might be even more educational for both sides. How did this affect coalition morale? It destroyed it completely. We had thrown everything we had at humanity and failed to defeat them. Worse, we had given them detailed knowledge of our most advanced tactics and technologies. What was your personal reaction? Terror beyond anything I had ever experienced. I finally understood that we weren't fighting a war against humans. We were fighting against human nature itself. What do you mean? Humans don't fight to win battles. They fight to solve problems. The problem they were solving wasn't how to defeat the coalition. It was how to survive and protect their species. Every tactic they used, every sacrifice they made, every innovation they developed was focused on that single goal. And this made them more dangerous? It made them unstoppable. A species that treats warfare as just another problem to solve will always find solutions that other species can't imagine. Zethkalar looked at Nimthara with hollow eyes. After Titan's Gate, I knew that the coalition could never defeat humanity through military force. We could destroy their ships, conquer their planets, even eliminate most of their population. Zethkalar sat in silence for several minutes after finishing his account of Titan's Gate. His forearms had stopped trembling, but his eyes remained fixed on something far beyond the walls of the interview room. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of exhaustion that 17 years had not lifted. The war ended 6 months after Titan's Gate. He began slowly, not with a treaty or formal surrender, but with a simple announcement from Coalition High Command. All military operations against humanity were to cease immediately. Our fleets were recalled to Coalition space, and all contact with human territories was suspended indefinitely. Nimthara looked up from her notes. The Coalition simply gave up. We had no choice. The psychological cost of continuing the war was destroying our military from within. Half of our experienced officers had requested transfers to non-combat roles. Ship crews were refusing orders to engage human forces. Some entire fleets had declared themselves unwilling to participate in further operations. What caused this breakdown in military discipline? Fear, Zethkalar replied simply. Not fear of death or defeat, but fear of fighting an enemy that we could never truly understand or predict. Every engagement with humans left our forces more demoralized than the last. But surely the coalition's superior numbers could have eventually won. Numbers meant nothing against an enemy that became more dangerous with every battle. Our military analysts had calculated that defeating humanity would require the complete destruction of every human world, and even then we couldn't be certain that scattered survivors wouldn't find ways to continue fighting. Zethkalar took a sip from his cup, his movements more controlled now. 6 months after the war ended, Coalition leadership authorized a comprehensive study of human military capabilities. They wanted to understand how a species with inferior technology had defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy. What did this study reveal? That we had never been fighting a war in the traditional sense. We had been fighting against human adaptability itself. The study identified over 300 distinct tactical innovations that humans had developed during our 3-year conflict. 300 new tactics in 3 years? New tactics, new weapons, new strategies, new ways of thinking about warfare. Some of these innovations were developed during individual battles and deployed within hours. Others were created by studying our previous engagements and designing specific counters to our most effective strategies. How was such rapid innovation possible? The study concluded that humans approach warfare the same way they approach scientific research. Every battle was an experiment. Every tactic was a hypothesis to be tested. Every defeat was data to be analyzed and learned from. Zethkalar's expression grew thoughtful. The most disturbing finding was that human military doctrine had no fixed form. Unlike coalition forces, which followed established procedures refined over centuries, human tactics evolved continuously based on immediate circumstances. Did you have any personal contact with humans after the war? Yes. During the prisoner exchange negotiations, I met Colonel Dan Wright, who had commanded human forces during several engagements. I was curious to understand how human military thinking actually worked. What did you learn from Colonel Wright? He explained something that still troubles me today. He said that humans don't see warfare as fundamentally different from any other human activity. To them, fighting a war is similar to building a city, solving a mathematical problem, or treating a disease. That seems like an unusual perspective. Colonel Wright told me that human military training doesn't just teach soldiers how to fight. It teaches them how to think about problems, how to adapt to changing situations, and how to work together to achieve goals. Military tactics are just applications of general human problem-solving methods. Did this conversation change your understanding of the war? Completely. I realized that we hadn't been defeated by human military superiority. We had been defeated by human nature itself. A species that treats every challenge as a problem to be solved will always find solutions that other species can't imagine. Nimthera leaned forward with interest. What was Colonel Wright's perspective on the conflict? He thanked me for what he called an excellent learning experience. He said that fighting the coalition had taught humanity valuable lessons about large-scale military operations and had accelerated human technological development by several decades. The humans viewed the war as educational. They viewed it as an opportunity to test their capabilities against a sophisticated opponent. Colonel Wright showed me human military reports from the war, and they read like scientific papers. Each engagement was analyzed for tactical lessons, technological insights, and strategic implications. How did this make you feel? Horrified, Zethkalar admitted. We had fought a desperate war for survival, and the humans had treated it as a research project. They had been learning from us while we were trying to destroy them. What were the long-term consequences of the war for the coalition? Everything changed. Our entire understanding of military strategy had to be reconsidered. The war had proven that technological superiority and numerical advantage could be overcome by superior adaptability and innovation. Did the coalition military adopt any human tactics? We tried, but human tactics don't work for other species. Coalition soldiers are trained to follow orders and execute established procedures. Human tactics require individual initiative, creative thinking, and constant adaptation. These are not skills that can be easily taught. What happened to your military career after the war? I was assigned to the Coalition Defense Institute, where I spent 10 years studying human military methods. My job was to help develop new training programs that might give coalition forces some ability to counter human-style warfare. Were these programs successful? Partially. We learned to be more flexible in our tactical thinking and to encourage more initiative among junior officers. But we could never replicate the human ability to innovate during combat or to treat every battle as a learning opportunity. Did you ever have any contact with human military forces after the war? Twice. The coalition arranged joint training exercises with human forces as part of our mutual defense agreements. These were supposed to be educational exchanges where both sides could learn from each other. How did these exercises go? They were humbling experiences. Even in training scenarios, human forces consistently demonstrated capabilities that our military couldn't match. They would analyze the exercise parameters, identify weaknesses in the scenario design, and develop tactics that exploited those weaknesses. What was most impressive about human performance in these exercises? Their ability to coordinate complex operations without rigid command structures. Human units seemed to anticipate each other's actions and adapt their strategies in real time. It was like watching different parts of a single mind working together. Did these exchanges change coalition military doctrine? They forced us to acknowledge that traditional military thinking had limitations. The coalition began emphasizing flexibility and adaptation in training, though we never achieved anything close to human capabilities in these areas. What is your assessment of humanity's place in galactic affairs? Humanity has become the most influential military power in the galaxy, not because of their weapons or ships, but because of their approach to problem solving. Other species now study human methods and try to adapt them to their own capabilities. Do you believe another conflict between humans and the coalition is possible, No, Zethkalar replied firmly. The coalition learned that military conflict with humanity is counterproductive. Humans become stronger through adversity, so attacking them only makes them more dangerous. What is the current relationship between your species? Cautious cooperation. The coalition benefits from human innovation and problem-solving abilities, while humans benefit from coalition resources and established trade networks. Both sides understand that partnership is more beneficial than conflict. What do you want other species to understand about humanity? Zethkalar looked directly at Nimthara for the final time. That humans are unlike any other species in the galaxy. They don't just adapt to challenges, they use challenges to become stronger. They don't just solve problems, they use problems to learn new ways of thinking. Is this something to fear? Only if you approach them as enemies. Humans respond to hostility with innovation, to threats with adaptation, and to violence with solutions that make them more capable of surviving future violence. Any species that chooses to fight humanity should expect to lose, not because humans are stronger, but because they learn faster. What is your final assessment of human military capabilities? Humans don't have military capabilities in the traditional sense. They have human capabilities applied to military situations. This means that their potential for military innovation is limited only by their ability to think of new solutions to problems. And what is that limit? After 3 years of war and 17 years of study, I don't believe there is one. Humans seem capable of finding solutions to any problem, given enough time and motivation. This makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy to fight against, and the most valuable species to have as allies.